Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak today about the second royal dynasty in Russia. In 12th centuries, we used to have two ruling dynasties. One was called Rurikovichi, and they continued from the 9th century to the end of the 16th century. And the second dynasty was the Romanovs, who came to power in 1613 and ruled for 304 years until on March 2, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated. The beginning was connected with something like very heavy, a bloody civil war, when for 15 years Russian people used to kill each other, supporting different imposters. 1/3 of population was killed. I think it looks similar to the civil war of the 17th century in England, and maybe to the War of Roses between York and Lancaster. So it was heavy, it was very hard, but eventually Russian people united their forces, joined their efforts, wished to have consensus, and they elected the member of the Romanov family as their Tsar. He was Mikhail. And the Romanov family was one of Russian noble families. One of the advantages they had was the connection with the previous dynasty, Rurikovichi, through the first wife of Ivan the Terrible. Her name was Anastasia Romanova, and she was the first of 7 and beloved wife of Ivan the Terrible. So the Romanov started to rule. And the first Romanov, Michael, really was not outstanding personality. However, the Romanovs arrived in time. They brought peace, consensus, and the beginning of restoration of economy and social life. The big contribution was made by the second Romanov. His name was Alexis, and he ruled from 1645 to 1676, when the economy was restored, the political system was restored. You know, Alexis had nickname Alexis the Calm, but he was quite a strong ruler. And if he did not like something, he used to do this decisively. For example, Russia used to have a quite intensive economic connection with England, but the minute Alexis heard that in 1649 Charles was beheaded, he interrupted economic relation with Britain for a while, because his ambition was to strengthen political power of Russian Tsar, and he succeeded in this very much. So, under the first Romanov in the 17th century, Russia stayed a feudal country based on serfdom. So peasants had no their land, and they worked and paid big tribute to landlords. And also he made Russia politically as absolute power of one. He also was responsible for very special situation within the Romanov family, because he was married twice. The first wife produced many children and then accidentally died. And at that time, Alexis was 40 years old. I do not know, what do you think about people who are 40 years old? I think they are quite young. But at that time, I'm speaking about 17th century, life expectancy was 35, 33 years old. So he was definitely an old man. And he met a beautiful 19 years old girl, very energetic, beautiful, illiterate, and fell in love with her. and married again. And several children were produced in this second marriage. So this is why when Alexis died in 1676, and then his first successor died very soon, in 1682, there was a big fight for power. And that big fight for power between different members of the Romanov dynasty, between different children of Alexis, it's ended up by a very special situation, unique, which was called Koza. Two boys, two sons from different wives were both called equal czars, and they had to sit on the same armchair. The double armchair was designed in the same czar costumes and rule the country. Of course, they did not rule. They just used to sit and to participate in ceremonies, and their sister and Peter's half-sister used to rule. Their names were Ivan and Peter. Ivan was the son from the first wife, Maria Miloslavskaya, and Peter was Alexis' son from the second wife. And probably the biggest thing Alexis made for Russia was to produce, of course, together with his wife, this son, Peter, future Peter the Great. Because later on in 1689, he started to rule on his own. His rule was long, continued to 1725, and it was absolutely outstanding because he was an outstanding personality and he was absolutely unusual. He was unusual by his appearance because he was very tall, 2 meters, 4 centimeters, and very energetic and full of brain, intellect, and the major thing, desire to change Russia, to make it much more modern country, to move it closer to Europe. And he did it because he was unusual by his way of life. He hated ceremonies. He hated this very slow way of life when czars and Russian nobility used to spend hours during their dinners in churches, naps. No, Peter did not participate in ceremonies. He used to wake up at 5 o'clock and used to go to his workshop and to do job. He was eternal toiler on the throne, working hard to improve and to change Russia, to learn different professions and skills. He used to have 14 professions. He used to be carpenter, builder, sailor, soldier, dentist, astronomist, and many, many, many other things. And this is why the result of his personality were really, really great. He built up Russian Navy for the first time and turned Russia from river civilization into a sea civilization. So for 7 centuries, Russia stayed very much inland, sailing only along rivers, have no sea and ocean trade. And this boy, living in father's estate, found a small Dutch sailboat, and he started to have a dream about navy, and he built up it. To the end of his rule, Russia had one of the strongest navy in Europe, with 50 big and 800 average ships, and turned into big sea power. He started industrialization of Russia because he gave order, money, and many metal producing, iron producing, weapon producing plants were built up and started to function in Russia. The country which used to stay absolutely rural before started to turn gradually into industrial, an independent country. He was great enlightener because he needed educated and professional people, and he opened the first secular schools in Russia. He opened the first colleges, navy, medical, artillery colleges. He opened the Academy of Science, and Russian enlightenment started. And the place where many of these things were concentrated emerged in history. And the place is very special. In 1703, Peter established one of the most beautiful cities in the world, probably the most, which is called St. Petersburg, a fantastic mixture of Russian and European features, wonderful architecture, beautiful squares and streets, one of the most intellectual, cultural cities in Russia and in the world. Do come to Russia and you will enjoy St. Petersburg, and you will be very much impressed. Peter also wanted to change way of life, at least of Russian nobility, and he was Russian. And he was very tough in this. He gave order Russian nobility to wear only European dresses, not Russian, to book their dresses in Paris. He started to cut beards of Russian men. He started to give order and to give to shave. Russian men to shave. This was something very unusual because Russian church blessed beard of Russian men. It was considered as ornament given by God. And Russian patriarch used to say that God did not create men beardless, only cats and dogs. And to go to church without beard was considered as a mortal sign, as the lack of self-respect. But emperor with 100% power used to give order to cut this beard during receptions. And there was special group of soldiers who were working across St. Petersburg. And if they saw men with beard, used to cut it with skin, with pain, and so on. So sometimes Peter was kind, and he allowed some elderly people to wear their beard, but they had to pay very, very heavy tax, 30, 60, or 100 rubles, and to wear a badge, that the beard tax is paid. But Peter changed Russia. He moved it into another civilization. However, he was so much rushing. He was sometimes so violent that it was not supported very much, even by Russian nobility. And his modernization was not continued for a long time in the 18th century. Peter died in 1725, and another page in the history of the Romanov dynasty started, which is called the time of coups, because it was not clear who had to follow Peter. There were no boys. There was a shortage of boys, especially in the first direction. And there were 5 women, 2 daughters of Peter the Great and 3 of his co-Tsar Ivan. And they all had equal rights for the Russian throne. So this is why they started to replace each other every time, asking guard officers to help them to come to power. So that 18th century turned into the female century in Russian history. The second feature was that 2 lines of the Romanov dynasty were fighting with each other. And at first, Peter's line continued. It was his wife, Catherine I, who ruled for 2 years from 1725 to 1727. Then his grandson, who was 12 years old and died in 3 years of smallpox. And at that time, in 1730, Ivan's daughter came to power. She was Empress Anne and stayed for 10 years. And then there was another coup, and Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great. So Peter's line was restored. And these women did not make very much to continue modernization of Peter the Great, although some of them had their part to play, especially Elizabeth, who was a beautiful woman, and she liked masquerades, balls, beautiful dresses. She used to have 15,000 of dresses and never appeared second time in the same dress. But she also liked architecture. And she commissioned the Winter Palace to Rastrelli. Bartolomeo Rastrelli built up Winter Palace, which turned into the residence of Russian emperors, and it is absolutely fantastic. And when you come to Russia, you will see it and some other beautiful palaces which were built up at that time, Baroque and Rococo style. They are very, very impressive. The modernization of Peter the Great was continued by another female ruler. She ruled Russia from 1762 to 1796 for 34 years. And these years were fantastic. And this is the result of paradox, because that woman was born in Germany and she was 100% German. That 100% German girl, Sofia Frederica Augusta Angel Zerbskaya, arrives by invitation in 1744 to be a wife for Russian heir, the heir for the Russian throne. And they were married, not very happily, it was very much state marriage, but she had to accept Russian Orthodox Christianity and change her name for Catherine. So, in 1762, after the coup against her husband, she turned into Russian empress with 100% of power. So at 33 years, we got this product of European civilization who was keen on reading of Montesquieu, Diderot, Voltaire, and other authors of European Enlightenment. And she got 100% power in the country based on feudal system, serfdom, when most of people were property of their landlords. Was she able to do something or not? Yes, she was. And she did. She gave freedom at least to Russian nobility. And Russian nobility turned into people with fixed rights. It's happened for the first time in Russian history because they got freedom of service, and all their property, land, palaces, estate was fixed for them forever, and they could pass to their children. She was very much keen on the development of Russian education, and she established proper school system in Russia with 2 levels, like primary schools and secondary school, and with the curriculum which included science, humanities, and foreign languages. Actually, Russia got one of the best school system in the whole Europe. She started female education in Russia and established Smolny Institute for the girls from the noble families. And they had to be very well educated. They had to be wonderful women, being able to play music, to dance. They had to be angel. And it started to be very prestigious to marry these noble girls who graduated from Smolny female university. We got the phenomenon of Russian educated women thanks to Catherine. Catherine made great contribution into the development of Russian culture, because secular Russian culture was born in her time and very much under her influence. Many theaters appeared in Russia, 50 private theaters only in St. Petersburg, one better than another, following Catherine pattern. The first professional writers emerged in Russia because Russian nobility got freedom, and they followed Catherine's habit to read and to write. Russian secular painting was born in Catherine's time. In 1764, she commissioned some diplomats, gave them money to buy the first collection of Dutch painting, 229 paintings. And this was the beginning of Hermitage. Today, the birthday of Hermitage is celebrated on Catherine name day, because it was the beginning of one of the greatest museums in the world, with 3 million exhibits. And people may know nothing about Russia, but they know about Hermitage, and they try to come and to see it. This is the creation of Catherine, and she deserved to be called Catherine the Great. And she was called Catherine the Great by her contemporaries. And Russia made the second step in modernization and started the golden age of Russian culture. It does not mean that Catherine was an ideal. How was she able, by the way, to do all these? I'm not speaking already building up Russian Black Sea Navy, many beautiful cities, to develop southern Ukraine. She had some helpers, and she was very good manager, because she was surrounded by talented people. Her diplomats, her ministers, her military leaders were very talented people, and she used to learn from them and to give them freedom to do something for the country. Some of them were her favorites. Actually, Catherine never was married during her rule, after her husband died, after the coup. But she did not stay on her own. She had 12 official favorites, not at the same time. 12 in 40 years. They followed one after another, and sometimes there was a long break if she did not like anybody. The trouble was that she was getting older and older, and they were getting younger and younger. And eventually, she got the last one when she was 60 years old, and he was only 22. So there was almost 40 years difference. The major problem was that he was not very clever. He was not clever like Potemkin, her greatest passion. For 3 years, they were in great love, and he was a real statesman who helped Catherine to rule country, and was called Emperor without crown, and who was very much keen on theater, music, culture, and so on. So the 18th century was a great time when Russia started to change. However, Catherine did not abolish serfdom, although she wanted. She did not give constitution. She did not give political freedom to the country. She did not give parliament. And this stayed the major task for the Romanovs in the 19th century. To give constitution, to limit absolute power of one, and to give freedom to peasants. This was the task for the 5 last Romanovs emperors. It's easy to remember them because they had only 2 names. 3 Alexanders, Alexander the First, the Second, the Third, and 2 Nicholas. Did they fulfill that historic task or not? The answer would be different for different of them. Alexander the First, who ruled from 1801 to 1825, tried. He tried. He made something like half step, but then he stopped in his reform activity, maybe because of war with Napoleon. And you probably know about him because it was the heaviest experience for Russian people, war with Napoleon in 1812, when Napoleon came with big army, 600,000, and they captured Moscow. But Russian people fought with great courage under the rule of Alexander I, and eventually they won. And we, Britain and Russia, we were allied in our fight against Napoleon. So later on in 1815, Alexander I visited London, Wellington House, and there is a big portrait of him there. His brother, Nicholas I, who ruled for 30 years from 1825 to 1855, was very different. He was not keen on reforms, and he came with the idea, I will not let the revolution and reforms to happen in Russia. And they did not happen. And even more, he turned Russia into a police state, and he involved Russia into the Crimean War with Turkey and then with Britain and France, and it was heavily lost. It was heavily lost, but it stimulated his son, Alexander II, who started to rule in 1855, to conduct very deep reforms and to make the next big step in modernizing Russia. He abolished serfdom in 1861, and he said, I abolish serfdom forever in this country. He introduced self-government in the country. He made very, very good judicial reform, introducing jury, open court, the competition of procurator and attorney. So Russian court just jumped on the European level, absolutely. So Alexander II made reforms in absolutely right direction. He used that great opportunity for gradual evolutional development into democratic country. But the paradox is, and the tragedy of our development, that he was not appreciated enough. On March 1st, 1881, he was assassinated by revolutionaries. And this 1st March 1881 was turning point in the history of the Romanov dynasty and probably in the whole Russian history. Because to last thus from the Romanov dynasty, his son Alexander III and his grandson Nicholas II, they were staying beside the dying Alexander II, and they decided not to continue reforms. To continue reforms, not. To go back, to stop modernizing Russia. And they did this. And this is why they brought Russia to revolutions, really catastrophic troubles. Alexander III tried to go back to cancel reforms of his father. When Nicholas II in 1894 came to power because his father died, he said, I had to pass my country to my son as I picked it up from my father. And when liberally minded people asked him to allow political parties, political freedom, to give constitution, he said they are useless dreams. So, and this is why he got this responsibility for the crash of his monarchy, for the crash of the Romanov dynasty. This is why on March 2, 1917, he was abdicated, turned into Colonel Romanov, and the next year, he and all his family, they were murdered by Bolsheviks. So, both last Romanovs were not enough capable statesmen. They did not fulfill the historic task to modernize Russia slowly. And there was a real chance for Russia to be something like Britain, to turn into a modern country, but to have a wonderful royal family, like you could enjoy your wonderful Queen Elizabeth, William, Kate, to follow their marriages, to enjoy their children, their birth, and growing up. So we lost this opportunity because Alexander III and Nicholas II did not realize the historic task. The paradox is that in their private life, they were absolutely fantastic. They were wonderful husbands. They were wonderful fathers for their children. And actually, through the three last rules, we could follow the connection with British royal family, because the only daughter of Alexander II married Alfred, the second son of Queen Victoria. And then there was a wedding in the Winter Palace, very rich and glamorous, and Alexander II gave 100,000 pounds to his daughter, to this new family. Alexander III was married the daughter of Danish king, Christian IX, and she was sister of Alexandra, British queen and mother of a British king. So this is how the Romanovs turned again even more relatives with the British royal family. And maybe because of this, Nicholas II and George V looked alike. They looked really like twins. And the third case was marriage of Nicholas II, because he married granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Alex of Hessen, who turned into Russian Empress Alexandra Fedorovna, and she brought up her 5 children exactly like Queen Victoria used to bring up her children in Osborne House. Very well brought up. But the history of the Romanovs finished as a tragedy by this murder, and unfortunately nobody survived. All children were killed. So the romantic stories about survival of Anastasia, of course, are not true. Her remains were identified in the 90s. So, speaking about the Romanovs family, they were very rich and controversial 300 years. Some of them pushed Russia forward and brought many wonderful things to Russia. Some of them did not fulfill historic task, but it is so interesting to speak about them, about their activity, about their private life. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.